Is there anything you want to talk about specifically?
Not particularly, no.
Okay, we'll just.
I didn't have any subject in mind.
he didn't even know
Well,
this
you
was
never
happening
know.
until
Like, there may be
yesterday.
some words of wisdom that you want to share at the end. And
Well, now that I'm such a powerful influencer, yes, there are a few things.
All right, so we'll just ask you some
Brent
questions.
Cutcliffe, the influencer.
All right.
Welcome to our 50th, right?
Oh, that's next month.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
49th episode.
Yeah, 49th episode. Yep, yeah.
Hello, I am William Jamarite,
And I'm Hattie.
and this is our podcast, HattieJo. And today, as you guys can see, you may be wondering who this gentleman is here next to
Can't
us.
see the resemblance.
It is Hattie's father, Brent Cutcliffe.
Yeah, he and Susan are our first visitors here in our new home of Arizona. So,
And yeah, well, we're thrilled to be here. Drove down in one day from Denver yesterday.
yep,
Made it through the snow in Flagstaff
yep.
and found it to your apartment.
Yeah, everything all worked
Even
out.
though we took the milk run the last 30 miles in.
It happens.
We'll know better going back.
Yes.
It's renewed my distrust for Google Maps. So I was just getting to trust
To
it a little
finally
bit.
trust
yeah.
them again. Yep, yep.
Yeah, and now I'm going to go
Shared
back
values.
to
Trust is
manual.
all about shared values, right?
Going back to MapQuest and
Yeah.
typing it in and
Yeah.
giving you all the directions.
But anyway, we're here. We slept well last night.
Good.
And loving the warm weather, even
Well-
though it's not warm for
Yeah.
Phoenix
Yeah,
standards.
yeah.
Yeah, it's actually
It is
amazing.
definitely not warm for Phoenix standards. Like,
It's like the coldest it's been since we moved.
Mhm.
So we're blaming you guys for bringing the cold, but if you think it's warm.
Well, it came down the hill with us from Flagstaff,
Yeah.
for sure.
well, it's probably cold before you got here, so I'm not blaming you.
Well, Susan remarked, we don't really, coming from Colorado, we have mountains and they're remarked on all the time.
Right.
Driving through Arizona, you realize, and New Mexico too, there's mountains all down and around here. We
Yes.
just don't remark on them coming from Denver.
Right, right. And I will say they're smaller.
Mhm.
Like they're not
Yeah.
as big as the Colorado mountains, but when you're used to it all the time, why would you remark on it? Whereas
Yeah.
if you're, like North Carolina has nothing like this.
Mhm.
So when you
Right.
see some of it, you're totally blown
Yeah.
away.
But it is remarkable, the 18 miles of, 3 and 4, even 5 and 6% slopes from Flagstaff.
Right,
And knowing that that's like 6,000 or 7,000 feet at the peak,
right.
and Phoenix is 1,000.
Yeah, we're low.
Yeah. You have a similar elevation gain in Denver if you go from, say, 5,000 feet in Denver plus 7 gets you to 12,000 feet in the mountains.
Right, right. It's a big.
So
it's a big
that's a
difference.
similar
Yeah.
altitude gain.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
so I wanted to kind of start off the questioning.
Oh, the question?
Yeah. That's what an interview is. That's what an interview is.
I thought that was last night.
An interview is us asking you questions.
Okay.
So,
Alright.
like, tell us a little bit about, like, your siblings. Like, how many siblings do you
Sure,
have?
yeah.
And, like, growing up, what was it
Yeah,
like
well,
in the Cutcliffe
sure, yeah.
household?
Well, there were 6 of us, 5 boys and 1 girl. I'm number 2 in the
Pecking order.
the sequence. So Blake, Brent, Neil, Nora, and Kirk and Chris. And as most people know, Chris was born with brain injury, severe brain injury, and he passed away at a fairly young age compared to normal people. I think he was in his late 30s at the time. And but it's typical for people with similar conditions. Very
Yeah.
few last beyond 40, which is it's just a fact.
Yeah.
It's not. So we were.
And you're all pretty close
we were
in
close
age.
in
Like
age,
stair
yeah.
steps each
Yeah.
year. It wasn't like 2 and then big break. and
Right,
several
right. No,
more.
it was absolutely 18 months for the first 5 kids,
Right.
and
Oh.
then 3 years between number 5 and number 6.
Gotcha.
Between Kirk and Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were all little together.
Right. Right. And like you're close in age to both children that are older and younger than you.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
And you grew up in PE.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we grew up on Prince Edward Island. The family moved there.
Canada, for those of
when
you
I
that
was
don't know, PEI.
3, I think 1962. I think that's right. Nora was born on PEI, so when we moved, Mom was pregnant, and Nora was born in August. of 62, and then Kirk in December 63. That's right. So we moved in 62.
Cool.
So Dad packed up everything into a boxcar, rented a boxcar on the train. The train, went to PI. We went there, picked it up. Of course, I wasn't there to pick it up.
It's like pods, but the older version.
Yes, yeah, the original. So he did things like nail boards into the bottom of the railroad car to brace the washer and dryer machine.
So stuff wouldn't move
So
around?
it wouldn't move, yeah.
Oh.
So it was all very well packed.
Yeah.
And
Stabilized.
he had purchased a 1961 Pontiac Laurentian, brand new. Just either the very year or the year before. It was $2,000 exactly. His salary at the time was $4,000 exactly.
Oh, wow.
$4,000 a year.
Right, so exactly half of his
Exactly
yearly,
half the salary. It was a typical car of the time. I'm not even sure it had I don't think it had seat belts. I'm certain it didn't have seat belts.
I'm sure it didn't.
Yeah. So we drove together. So it was Mom and Dad, Blake, Brent, and Neil. Neil was just an infant. Neil was born in 61, so he would have been just a little over a year.
Right.
Okay.
Well, if Aunt Nora was just about to be born, that means Neil was only born 18 months before.
That's right. Yeah. So we did the trip. I have no memories of doing the trip.
Right.
There was one point my mom has remarked on a few times where she thought we were all going to die on the trip when Dad was passing somewhere, somehow, and she didn't think he was going to get past the car and back into the lane in front of the oncoming traffic. Yeah, so there was some heart-stopping moments for her on the trip. But we all survived. And at the end of the day, we're all still here.
So yeah, if you could sum up the personalities of each of your siblings in like a sentence or two, what is the brief snapshot you would say for each?
Okay,
well, and do yourself too, because I'm curious.
Okay, Blake's the hard worker.
Okay, he's the oldest.
I'll do myself last to give myself time to think about it.
Okay.
Neil's the genius.
Okay.
Nora's the academic. She's the perfectionist.
Yep.
Kirk is the all-round good guy. He excelled in every area.
Yeah.
From academics to
social situations.
Yeah, social skills and what have you. And Chris was just a joy to be around.
Yeah, absolutely. He is a joy.
He loved everybody, and he loved everything.
Yep.
Excuse me.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, take your time.
Yeah. It just shows what a testament how important he was to you and the whole family. And
He was very much part of the family. He was involved in everything we did. Eventually, his verbal skills were never beyond one or two words, yes or no, and maybe a few side words, but he could communicate through other means.
Right.
The bliss board and what have you.
Yeah, so the bliss board is actually really cool. As a kid, I thought it was ingenious, right? So it seems, with everything we have with technology today, it might seem like very archaic, but at the time, I thought it was genius, and I still think it's very effective.
Yeah.
So it's essentially a laminated board that has different symbols and words on it, and you can also put pictures. Like he had one whole section that was pictures of people. So if he wanted to discuss, my brother Brent, my mom, there's pictures of all these people. And so he could point to the individuals, he could point to the words, and he could communicate that way without being held back by any.
Yeah, and I'm sure you could implement the Bliss technology on on computers. Very easily. Yeah,
right.
Because it was a visual way to choose your words.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they were organized and grouped in rows and columns. And
it all had a specific organization. Like it wasn't random.
Yeah.
And so you're searching through. So that was something that I was really impressed at, was how organized and efficient it could be to carry out a conversation. Which, if you think about, I'm trying to put my main vocabulary, I can't include every word, right? So you got to be judicious about which ones you include, but you also need to have it organized in such a way that the common ones are easy to find, and ones that go together are near each other. And so I thought it was really cool.
And how do you describe yourself?
Yeah, so how do you describe yourself?
So I would say I'm a little bit of a mix between Blake and Neil. I don't have nearly the genius of Neil, but I do have some level of, insights into things that not everybody sees naturally.
So does that mean you have some of the hard work of Blake, or no?
I do, but not, again, not nearly to the extent of Blake or Nora. I mean, Nora's an extremely hard worker too, with her academic bent.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
I love it. So you grew up in Canada. We talked about Prince Edward Island, and you came to the U.S. for your first job.
Right.
Is that correct? Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about, was there culture shock for you when you came? Had you been visiting the U.S.? It all seemed so similar. Or how was that like? And what was the transition for you moving so far away?
Yeah, so I would love to hear about your college years as well, because you went to college in Canada.
So let's start with the college. Yeah, let's go sequentially.
So how would you say, is college very much different from college in America, or is
very much.
What was it?
And wasn't your college experience also different because of badminton and you left home earlier? Right, so you were not on the traditional college path that everyone else kind of went. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I started college at a young age. I was 16 when college started. I turned 17 in October on my birthday in my freshman year. Right. And I had taken an option that's only available on Prince Edward Island, versus the other provinces, of early admissions to UPEI.
Okay.
And the idea behind the program, which I really didn't understand it at the time, but I do today, was that the educational system on PEI was not considered up to par with what then we knew as Upper and Lower Canada. So Upper Canada is Ontario, Lower Canada is Quebec.
Okay.
Of course, you have the Western provinces in BC. And so the idea was that if you had a one-year college experience on Prince Edward Island, that would be equivalent to starting as a freshman.
Gotcha. So it's like the
in
catch-up.
Upper and Lower in Canada.
It's the catch-up to get you prepared up to par with everyone else.
Right. So the program was offered to advanced students in high school on PEI, so they could do their first year at UPEI. Think of it like junior college.
Yes, exactly.
And then you could go straight into the program. Whereas if you completed grade 12, like everyone else, and you went to Upper or Lower Ontario or Quebec, they would expect you to complete grade 13.
Gotcha.
Which that's another anomaly. Those two provinces have 13 grades of school versus 12
Which
everywhere else.
Which is the whole reason why you need this extra gap year.
It's part of that reason.
Yeah.
Okay. So I went into UPEI, but with no notion of going to college in Ontario or Quebec as a.
So what was your motivation for going into UPEI for this program?
Well, at the time, I was tired of school. I didn't feel like there was, I felt like it went at too slow of a pace, and I was just interested in getting through.
Right.
And so this was a quick way to finish high school, was to basically just opt out of my senior year and start at UPEI. I was heavily involved in badminton at the time, and I wanted to spend quite a bit of time on badminton, and so I was able to organize my classes so as to do that.
To maximize your badminton.
Yeah, so I had lots of gym time, virtually about as much as the basketball team. We would practice before the basketball team. Then the team would come in.
Space,
yeah, we were in the same gym. So that was, badminton was a big motivation around a lot of things. So for example, my choice of major. My real interest was in science and math, but I ended up taking business admin. Because the engineering courses were
too time consuming.
Too time consuming and too rigorous.
So even in Canada, athletes are making choices based off their sport as opposed to their academic interests.
Yeah, and I'm not saying these were good decisions, but this was my mindset at the time.
Well, and this was fully voluntary. Like no one was making him do this. Like he was still. You weren't paying tuition because school in Canada was free, right?
No. There's tuition at college.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. But college tuitions in Canada are very reasonable compared to U.S.
Gotcha.
tuitions, and even back then.
Right. So it wasn't, but I guess I just want to be clear for us Americans that are used to like, oh, doing athletics in college usually means you're getting a scholarship, right? So you're kind of
A free ride.
you're kind of
balancing.
giving up things and choices, right? But
There's a big economic
Right.
part of it, whereas in Canada there's no.
right,
Yeah.
and so no one was forcing
Yeah.
you to do this
Yeah.
choice. Like you just wanted to do it.
Yeah, and at the time, there's practically no such thing as a athletic scholarship in Canada.
Gotcha.
Right.
One or two kids on the basketball team would get support from the booster club or something.
Yeah.
Which is sort of behind the back money.
They've got booster clubs here.
Yeah. And I don't know what the situation is today. I suspect there are scholarships for athletics, for hockey or whatever.
So I didn't know that you didn't want, like, that business wasn't your first choice. I've
Yeah,
always known you
no.
to be very interested in business and stuff like that. So it's fascinating to me to hear that if you had had more free time or different values at this point in your life, you might have
Yeah.
chosen something different.
Yeah, so I ended up, I took math classes. I really couldn't do much other science, but I took math into the fourth year.
Right.
And at Christmas in my fourth year, I had to make a decision if I wanted to graduate with a math degree or a business degree.
Gotcha.
And so for the last semester in my fourth year, I had to concentrate. There was typically five classes per semester, so
Sure.
I had to make them more on the business, almost all on the business side to fulfill
Achieve
the
business
requirements.
the requirements. If I would have put them on the math side, I would have had enough for a math degree.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And I
Makes sense.
probably would have been better off in my life had I done the math degree.
Interesting.
The business degree didn't help me. I thought it would help me, and maybe it did help get the first, one or two jobs.
Yeah.
But as time went on, the world, the job market has become a lot more, a lot less focused on, specific skills and a lot more accommodating of general.
Yeah.
In other words, a
Education,
math
yes.
degree or an English degree or a history degree is as highly valued today as a business degree.
Yeah, and that's funny. Like
It's not an impediment.
Right.
a lot of times, like I talk to students or students that are going into college, and like you really should use college as a way to like get critical thinking skills and not just try to go and learn one
Specific
skill.
skills.
Yeah, specific skills.
Yeah, because right now the jobs that require those specific skills require additional degrees later, right? Like
Yeah.
you want to go be a doctor, you have to go to medical school. You want to be
Yeah.
a lawyer, you got to go to
Yeah.
law school, right? So it's not that you're coming out of undergrad needing those skills.
Yeah.
And plenty of people do pre-med and still go to law school, or they do business and econ and they still go to medical school, right? So like the skills that they're getting from their undergraduate degree are not necessarily funneling them one way or another in the rest of their life.
Yeah, and you can do any
plan.
kind of an undergrad degree, and if you're interested in business, you can do an MBA.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Right? So there is all of that.
And most of the times, whenever you get to like your first job or out of college, like they're going to teach you how to do the job. Like you're not going there like, oh, I should already know how to do this job. Like the degree is just showing that you have the ability to learn and have
Apply
the-
yourself
yes.
and be dedicated to get the
there are
job
many
done.
more jobs today that have that.
Right.
Whereas in the past, I think more jobs were focused on the domain knowledge than the critical thinking. In other
Right.
words,
Oh.
do a process. So domain knowledge, medicine, law, accounting, take your pick,
Right.
MBA. But the counterpoint, Will, is in the sciences, engineering. There is no way you can have a history degree and then go into a science and engineering job and.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, it takes time to acquire the scientific, the engineering background to do
Yes.
those. But that would be no different than, having going into the medical field. You need the medical training to do that.
Yes.
But I guess what I'm saying is a lot of people come out of the engineering, the science path, and take science jobs without the next level of training, right? Like your brother Rob,
Right.
a 4-year engineering degree, and they're ready to go. And so they get the domain knowledge and the critical thinking skills, all as a package.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so you got your business degree, and then what did you do next?
So then I got my first job. At the time I was graduating, it was a bit of an economic slump in 1980 in Canada. was here in the U.S. too. It wasn't a giant slump like we've had, recently. But things were down and jobs were tight, and I felt lucky to get a job as an income tax auditor out in Edmonton. And at the time, in the prior 4 or 5 years, the West had boomed
so
with
Edmonton
an oil
is in
boom.
British Columbia?
It's in Alberta. So
Alberta.
Calgary and Edmonton are kind of sister cities.
Gotcha.
And they were the epicenter of the Canadian oil business.
Okay.
Calgary more so. Edmonton, think of it as sort of the field office, and Calgary is more the headquarters.
Okay.
And not that there weren't any headquarters in Edmonton, but just the preponderance of. And they're only 3 hours apart. They're less than 200 miles, north and south of each other. But in any case, I was offered a job in Edmonton, so I graduated in May, and I think I moved in late June or early July to Edmonton. And they paid to box up some stuff. I didn't have much. I think the total bill for moving was something like $600. There was nothing to move other than a few clothes.
Right.
And so I flew there. Of course, they paid the flight. We all arrived. There was a big training program to teach us tax law.
Nice.
And so when we arrived, none of us had cars, none of us had apartments.
Right.
Everybody was starting
a bunch of just out of college kids.
Yeah. So the first few days you're finding accommodations, right?
Yeah.
And you're figuring out the bus path to work.
Right.
I'm not sure how I discovered it, but I came across an opening in a fraternity at the University of Alberta.
Okay.
Lambda Chi Alpha.
And
so,
opening as in a living space opening?
Right.
Okay.
So, for example, the students go home in the winter and there's
Space
in the summer.
All right.
Yeah.
It's like you're living with a bunch of frat boys.
So I moved in with a bunch of frat brothers, and they treated me just like a frat brother.
Yeah.
And
More the merrier.
one of the benefits of living in the frat house was that it was just across the river. So there's a big river running through the middle of Edmonton, and the business side is on one side of the river and the university's on the other with a big bridge in between.
Gotta keep that riffraff
So I could walk to work, whereas most of my other counterparts had apartments. Some of them were fairly close to downtown, but just like anywhere, the closer you are to downtown, the more expensive the apartment. So people were sort of scattered, not too far out, but not in the suburbs.
But you could drive.
But in any case, I was probably the only one who could really walk to work out of the group of 20 or so that started in this program. Maybe there were more than 20, but somewhere around there. So in any case, I could walk to work. And at the time, and I'm sure it's still this way in Canada, especially the big cities, Toronto, Calgary, maybe even Vancouver, hundreds of people walk to work.
Yeah.
And so I'd be walking across the bridge in the morning, and it's just throngs of people.
Yeah. Because everybody's walking.
Everybody's walking, and it was nothing back then to walk 30 minutes to work or 40 minutes. That was just very normal. And then at night you turn around and you walk home.
Right.
And one thing that was just coming into vogue at the time was having a different pair of shoes. So having walking shoes, in other words, like running shoes, Nike or whatever. As opposed to wearing your nice, so everybody's carrying their shoes. Yeah. Carrying their work shoes.
Interesting.
And walking. And the work situation was a big government building, big square gray, behemoth kind of a thing. And, we have this notion today of, open spaces in buildings. Well, that's what it was back then. There were literally 50 auditors on a floor, and there's not a wall in sight.
So do they have, they don't have the cubicles, you just have
just desks.
And
just rows and rows of desks.
No privacy at all.
No privacy whatsoever. And they were organized in little pods.
So like kindergarten, right? You got your 4 desks.
And so how it was set up here was the boss would sit behind. There was like 2 desks, and 4 of them, so 2 by 4. And then the boss sat behind in one desk, and his desk was sit in between, in the middle, so he could watch all of us, and we couldn't see him.
Right.
Got to keep our eyes on this.
And you had to be there by 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
And You know, everybody went to coffee break together at 10 or 10:15. Each of the pods had a different starting time for coffee break. Because
Right, 'cause you can't have everybody
can't
at
have
once.
everybody go to the lunchroom at the same time. It
Or
wouldn't.
meet at the water.
wouldn't
Well, yeah, if your break is only 15
Wouldn't fit
minutes, you
everybody.
wouldn't get through, it wouldn't fit everybody,
Wouldn't
and
fit
also not
everybody,
everybody would
yeah.
get coffee by the time it's trying to go back. Yeah.
Right. Everything was extremely regulated in this government environment, and when 5 o'clock came,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, you packed up your stuff.
Yeah, we're
you
not
know,
staying past
in a
5.
file, and everybody got up and left. And there was no expectation for anybody to stay past 5. That was just not part of the
Culture.
thing.
Yeah.
And of course, it's, you know, a winter culture. So walking at the start of October, it was pleasant to walk. But by the end of October, and it was absolutely gradual, it was frigid to walk. In other words, if you didn't have a good coat on at the end of October, you were very uncomfortable walking to and from work. And so when you came into work, one of the big things is coat racks and coat hangers. In any workplace, that was a huge, I mean, it's a requirement of the
area, yeah.
and even a place for your boots. So often people would wear over boots
Yeah.
over your shoes. And of course, if you're walking 30 minutes, they wouldn't last a week. I mean, the rubber would just wear off the bottom of boots. But on snowy days, people did wear boots. But actually, the people that were wearing boots were the ones who drove and parked nearby and then walked a couple of blocks through snow,
Right,
right? And so they're not,
Walking to
yeah,
work.
they have their work
Yeah.
shoes on and
It's
then
gonna
the boots
last.
over
The
them.
boots are gonna
Yeah.
last a little bit longer.
Yeah, so it was very much like that. You know, hats and mitts, scarves, you know, all of that. So that was sort of the milieu of.
And so were you
First
still
job
playing
experience.
badminton during this time?
I had started to play again in Edmonton because there was access to badminton in Edmonton through there was a couple of private clubs that had badminton courts, and that's where all the good badminton came from at the time in Canada, was from the private clubs. So the Royal Glenora Club was actually very close to work. It was walking distance from work, walking distance from the frat house.
Nice.
So yeah, it was all sort of I was right in the downtown. I mean, I was across the bridge from
Yeah.
downtown,
Right.
but
Close enough.
right
Interesting.
there, yeah.
So then I know you did you did business school.
Mhm.
Did that come before you moved down to the U.S. or
Mhm.
did you move to the U.S. and then go back up to Canada for business school?
Yeah, no, so I worked in the tax department for a year and a half, and then I started my MBA in the fall of 1981. So I started with Rev Canada in June of 1980, or July 1980. And so the following fall, so fall of 81, I went to the University of Saskatchewan for MBA school. And
Was that is it MBA 3 years or 2 years?
it's typically a 2-year program. And unfortunately, since that time, and I'm not sure when it happened, the University of Saskatchewan has gone to a 1-year MBA,
Oh, wow.
which has sort of devalued the degree
Yeah.
to
People don't
quite a
think
bit.
It's
Yeah.
as up
Yeah.
to snuff. Yeah.
and at the time it was sort of a mid-ranked university. It wasn't at the top of the list of MBA schools, but it also wasn't at the bottom.
Yeah.
Sure.
And there was really no way I wasn't going to qualify in to the top schools, partly because I didn't apply with enough lead time, and I didn't have the right qualifications from my undergrad from UPEI.
Sure.
All that time playing badminton.
Yeah.
Okay.
But university, there was nothing wrong with the education there.
Oh, yeah.
It served you well.
Yeah, and they were very accommodating in terms of giving me credits for domain knowledge from my undergrad.
I see.
So for example, I can't remember which courses they gave me credits for. Some they would and some they didn't.
I'm sure some math they were able to.
The math wasn't really a requirement of the. I think there was 1 or 2 accounting courses that I was able to opt out of.
Gotcha.
And so at the end of the day, I was able to complete the degree in 3 semesters instead of 4 because of these other credits.
Yeah, that
and
kinda-
the top schools they don't do that
Yeah,
at all.
right,
They're not
right.
even. So that was another
That-
draw for me
Yeah.
to go to Saskatchewan, was to do it in 3 semesters.
Nice. And this is the university where you were telling me about. There's so many days in a row that was like
Yeah.
negative 60 or something.
Yeah, so the first year I was there, after Christmas, they had a string of cold weather, which they do every year. And by the
It's
way,
Canada.
if in Saskatchewan, in the western provinces, you're in the center of the continent, and if snow comes in October, it's still on the ground in April.
Yeah, because it's
Okay.
like freezing the whole time.
Yeah, it comes and it stays, and more snow comes on top of it. So when there's fresh snow, everything's white, and a week later it's all brown, and then a couple weeks later it's all black.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just dirty.
Because it's just filth, right? The dirt is on top of it. Then new snow comes and new snow comes. So snow just keeps piling up.
Yeah.
And of course on the streets it's packed down.
Yeah.
But it's there.
Yeah.
Anyway, in January there was a string of cold weather where they set a new record for the number of days in a row where the low for the day was below minus 30 or minus 30 and below. And right around that point is where the two scales, or Fahrenheit
like
and
minus 40
centigrade,
is where they
meet.
meet.
Minus 40 is where they meet. I can tell you, minus 30 is very cold.
Yeah.
And on the day it broke, a Chinook blew through, and a Chinook is a warm wind. It's an
Yeah.
Indian word for a warm wind.
Okay.
Saskatchewan doesn't have many of them. Calgary has tons of Chinook winds every year.
Okay.
And a Chinook will come through, and in 2 days it'll melt all kinds of snow.
Oh wow.
Okay? So a Chinook came through, and the temperature went up to 33 degrees.
Ooh,
So it's
that's-
1 degree above freezing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people were walking around in t-shirts. It felt so warm.
Even
And
though
so
it's still basically freezing.
it's still basically
Yeah.
freezing, but my point is that your perception of temperature is somewhat relative. Most human senses are. And I mean, not relative forever, but
Right.
in the short run, it felt
Yeah.
so warm. It was a 60-degree shift. I lived only 2 or 3 blocks from the edge of campus. And I would wear long johns and a pair of jeans, and I had a giant parka jacket that would come down to, just above the knees. And I would get to college during this time period, and I couldn't feel my thighs.
Right. So you're
They're
just at the
frozen.
limit of like not freezing to death. Right.
Yeah, in about a 10-minute walk.
Yeah.
And I was active, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You're
You're
not just
pumping.
sitting out there.
Yeah. One night during this time period, I had to take my clothes to a laundromat, and it was 6 or 8 blocks one way down this street. So I had my bags with me. I had my hat pulled down and my mitts, and I walked to the laundromat, and I can remember thinking, God, that wind is cold in my face. And I got there, I did my clothes, and I walked back, and I'm thinking, oh, this is great, the wind's in my back, okay? And I got home, and it was only a 10 or 15 minute walk each way. I got home, and an hour later, I'm getting ready for bed. I'd done some
Yeah.
studying or some work, and I put my head down, and I go, God, my ear is sore. And so I turned my head over, and I put my other ear down. Jesus, that ear is sore too. And so then I put my nose on the pillow. God, my nose is sore. They were all frostbitten
Yeah.
from that,
Oh,
the,
And
yeah.
it
the
was
walk
so
too.
right, and it gets to a point where you can't even feel it anymore.
Couldn't even tell that I had frostbite. It was two or 3 hours later
Right.
that I
they finally
realized.
thawed out, yeah.
Well, not that they'd thawed out, but they were aching because of the.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm saying is
Yeah.
like the nerves were waking back up to feel the aching,
Yeah.
right?
Well, they weren't painful without pressure.
I see.
Okay.
I
So
see.
in other words, I'm just going around doing my daily
Daily stuff.
Yeah,
It wasn't
without
until
it
you
wasn't
were
until I
touched.
put pressure on the ear. So that night I slept,
your
on my
back.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah, because my ears were so
God.
sore.
Oh,
Yeah,
horrible.
yeah. So yeah, it's brutal, but the people come together. It's like the common enemy,
Right.
and
Common
no,
enemy.
it's absolutely
And then I
true.
took-
Whatever unites us, we
Yeah.
need something, a unifying
Yeah,
force.
and during those, I mean, the people are friendly to begin with, but when you're going places and you arrive at a common place, everybody is just, sort of thrilled, A, that they're there, and B, that you're there.
Yeah.
It's a very welcoming environment that you're in out of the cold.
Right,
That you're-
right. Wow. So then when you came to the U.S., that must have been part of a big I mean, Colorado gets cold, but not at all like
not
that.
even, not even close.
So as you're getting ready to come to America, what like in Canada, what is during this time? What is the perception of America as you're in Canada?
Yeah,
and
so
growing up?
at the time, the Canadian, I would say the general perception is that America is sort of big and bad, that Canadians are civilized and Americans are,
Not.
it's the Wild West. Americans are uncouth.
Ooh.
Americans are, not every American.
But the average
But
American.
not
general.
even the average, but Americans will cheat you, as opposed to Canadians are fair in their dealings.
Mhm.
Okay, Donald Trump would never get anywhere in Canada. He'd be ostracized from the community. Um,
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a self-promoter in Canada. So Barnum
Yes,
and
everyone's
Bailey.
very humble, very.
Yeah. So Trump also, espouses he's a self-promoter, right? And so that's very much frowned upon in Canada,
Right.
in all parts of Canada. Part of it is the Irish Roman Catholic influence, but there are other British Isle influences too. But it's that thing is very strong in Irish Roman Catholic culture.
So
is
were
to
you?
not be, a braggart or
Yeah.
a self-promoter in any way. So those were sort of known things. It was also known that Canadians tend to be more conservative and Americans tend to be more entrepreneurial. So Americans are more willing to take a risk.
Risks. So it wasn't conservative necessarily politically, but just
No,
like,
not politically,
we're going
economically.
to do economically.
Economically, yeah. In Canada, you wanted to have a job. In America, you want to start a business.
I see.
Okay.
Right. So you're willing to take the risk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Americans will. And the Canadian perception is that more Americans will take more
that
risks, and America will generate, an Elon Musk, and before Elon, there's a Jeff Bezos, and before him, there's a Bill Gates.
Right, because the culture is more
Yes,
accepting and promoting.
and not only do they create them, but they celebrate them. They become icons. They're larger than life. It's a rare businessman in Canada that transcends to pop culture.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
whereas in the United States, almost all the top businessmen transcend
Right.
into
Their
the general
household names,
their household
yeah.
names, like Donald Trump.
Or Bill Gates.
Or Bill
whatever,
Gates, yeah. So those were part of the perceptions. But, at an individual level, there's almost no difference between a Canadian and an American in terms of, what our exposures have been growing up, what we've been exposed to. The culture, the general pieces of the culture are very similar. So, for example, Calgary looks like Denver. They were both mostly built since the 1950s as a result of the oil boom, so the architecture is all the same. There's probably more buildings in downtown Denver than downtown Calgary, but not by a lot. But they all look more or less the same.
Yeah.
Okay. So did you seek out a job in the U.S. or did it kind of fall into your lap? Were you excited about it, ready to get out of Canada? Or were you like, oh God, I'm going to the land of the uncouth?
No, I was very anxious to go to the U.S. So what happened was, as I was wrapping up my MBA degree, I'd made the decision that I wanted to live in Calgary.
Okay.
So I restricted my job search to Calgary.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so landed a job with Arthur Andersen, and I started there. Finished my degree in December, started at Andersen in January, and within a couple of weeks of being there, they said my first assignment would be on the big Petra Lewis job in Denver.
Oh wow. Okay.
So I did my prep training in the Calgary office, and in the middle of March, I was on an airplane to Denver.
Wow.
And that was it. There was one other person from Denver who also came maybe a couple of months later, to the Denver job. And it was there that I met your mother. And of course I've been in Denver ever since.
Yeah. But at that time, was it the type of thing where it's like, oh, we're stationing you in Denver for the next 6 months or the next year, but eventually you're coming back to Calgary?
Yes, that's exactly what it was. So yeah, I came in March, and my assignment was for 6 or 7 months. I think it was 7 months. So at the end of September, I was scheduled to go back to Canada, which I did.
Okay.
So I went back to Canada and I found an apartment. So when I first went to Calgary, I was staying with a friend
Sure.
and just paying rent and sleeping in an extra bedroom
Sure.
and walking to work.
Yeah.
So came to Denver, and of course all expenses were paid.
Right.
Back then on these oil jobs, the money was just flowing like Canada, I believe. So went
Black
back
gold,
It's Jared
right?
Jones.
Yeah.
Black gold. So back to Calgary, found an apartment and worked through the fall in Calgary. And during that time, your mother and I got engaged. And so then I made a commitment to come back to Denver and started job seeking in Denver.
Got it.
And landed a job with Price Waterhouse to start in January.
I see.
So at Christmas time, your mom came up. We spent a week or so driving around through the mountains, through the ice fields, and then we drove to the U.S. In fact, I think we may have driven to Evansville.
I'm sure you did. What, like,
For
if you're going
Christmas.
up all that way, you might as well.
Well, Evansville was way over in the middle of the country by Chicago. It was it had to be then because there was no other time.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, if you were driving around in Canada.
Well, but we were
From
driving. Well, but Calgary and around
So you're
Calgary
saying
and the mountains.
She flew to Calgary
Yeah,
and then you
yes.
started driving. I
Yeah,
see.
yeah,
I
yeah.
missed
So
that part.
we did a little bit in the mountains,
Yeah,
and
I
then
see.
drove to
Stay back.
drove to Evansville, and on the way we after 1 or 2 days we were in Fargo, North Dakota,
Jeez.
and we got the motel for the night, and the next morning it was 40 below, and the car wouldn't start, and not only would the car not start, but we couldn't even shift the shifter.
Oh, wow.
The gearbox was frozen.
Yeah.
All the oil was frozen up.
Yeah.
We ended up snapping
Sit down,
off the key
down.
in the ignition.
You snapped the key
Snapped the
off?
metal key. The
Sure.
key wouldn't turn.
Yeah.
It was the key thing was frozen shut itself. And so of course we call a mechanic, but the earliest they can come is like the next day.
Yeah.
So we're overnight, we're just stuck there. The mechanic finally comes, and of course there's nothing wrong with the
It's
car.
just frozen.
It's
yeah.
just frozen. So the mechanic
Well,
tows
now
it
there's
to a
something wrong
garage,
with The keys.
and the key's stuck in there, but they were able to use
Pliers
needle
and
nose
get it
pliers
out,
and
yeah.
get it out, and I had a spare. So they haul it to a garage, and as the car warms up, all of a sudden, you can
works,
shift again, and you can start it up, and
Yeah.
there was nothing wrong with it. It just needed to warm up to get going. So then we were on our way to Evansville. So,
Anyway.
okay, so I think I misspoke when I said we drove to Fargo. I think we got as far as Minot,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is a few hours
just as
up the
Oh,
road
where this
from
is.
Fargo.
Just
Okay.
as cool.
Anyway, when
I'm sure
we
just
got
as-
going again, but by the time we got going, we'd lost a day of driving. We were going to be late for Christmas.
Right.
So the plan was we would drive to Fargo and get on an airplane. So we did. So we drove a couple of hours to Fargo, and the weather was still, extremely cold.
Yeah.
On that drive, but in any case, we got on the airplane, we got to Indiana,
You had a nice Christmas.
we had a great Christmas, and then we flew back to Fargo, so we bought, return
Yeah.
tickets,
Well, the car was
and
there.
then we drove from Fargo down to Denver.
So did you own the car?
Yeah, it was a Saab, it was a very nice,
So you, interesting thought process there.
yeah, and
Well,
so,
on the fly, you gotta make changes as changes happen.
So we got back to Fargo, and we parked the car. No, this was on the way from Fargo. So we parked in the long-term parking, which in Fargo just means you're another couple hundred yards away from the front of the airport, right?
Yeah.
Versus the close-in parking.
Yeah.
We grabbed our bags and we ran into the airport.
Yeah.
Okay, and I experienced the exact same thing later that night.
Oh, with your nose
My
and
nose.
ears.
Oh, getting
So,
frostbite.
and that was only a 5-minute interval,
Right.
Yeah.
So it's that much more colder.
Well,
Yeah.
and
Well,
you
you
know, it's
probably
the
weren't
wind
dressed
chill.
as well.
And your nose is exposed. It's partly
But
the
once
wind.
you're
and
frostbitten, that's it.
yeah,
You'll
you're
feel
more
it. Yeah,
susceptible
that's
to
right.
it in the
That's right.
future. That's
That's
true
right.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So another little pinch of frostbite in just that 5-minute
Jeez.
interval.
Well, you won't have any of that here in Arizona.
No, my God, no, no.
But in the summer it'll be like 115.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
the opposite of frostbite. No frostbite
Yeah.
here. Don't have to worry about that.
yeah.
Wow.
So that's how I ended up getting in Denver permanently.
Gotcha.
And so your mom and I were married that spring, in May, at the end of May.
Nice.
So yeah, a lot of things happen fast, you know, when you're young.
Yeah, well, it sounded like you just got out of business school and it was
Yeah.
like,
Boom,
new
boom,
job,
boom.
down to Denver,
Yeah.
back up, move to Denver,
Yeah.
like very quick.
Yeah. Things moved fast.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
So what was it like living in Denver and being Hattie's father? What was that like?
Best experience ever.
That was. It actually was. Yeah. Hattie was a model child.
Uh-huh.
There may be stories that suggest otherwise, but
Very few. Well, there are a few. But we don't need
Yeah, we don't need to get into
to
those.
dwell on the
Yeah.
negative side. But Hattie was always the child that wanted to do things. So, for example, at a very young age, you know, it wasn't long after you learned to tie your shoes, and you still weren't good
Got
at it,
it, yeah.
that you wouldn't want anybody else to tie your shoes. You know, I'll do it myself. I'll do it myself. Everything you wanted to do yourself, to do.
Yeah.
So that's been sort of the hallmark of you through your life, is that you're self-driven, and you want to be the one to do it, as opposed to watch it or just be the passive observer in life.
Right.
You wanted to get in and
Yeah.
get your
roll up your
hands dirty.
sleeves.
Yes.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And through school, even starting at a very young age, you were organized. At 4 and 5 years old, you could have a backpack that had all of the necessary stuff in it, whether it was going to preschool or then, you know, elementary school or, you know, on through whereas, you know, Robbie and Jeffrey, I mean, there was continually library books left home, homework left home. You know,
Right,
it
no
didn't
pencils,
matter.
like, no,
Yeah, it was just stuff wasn't. I mean, the backpack was on their back, but the stuff wasn't in the backpack. They just couldn't keep track, or weren't keeping track the way you did. You were ultra organized from a very young age.
Yeah.
And you taught yourself to read at a very young age. I think you were about 4 years old. And your mom had just moved out, maybe within a year or two prior. So I was extremely busy between work and you know, so
Being
we
a
had.
single parent,
Oh.
yeah.
Yes. So when I came home, there was 3 children and me.
Right.
And the au pair looked after you guys in the daytime, which was great, but it was, you know, me at night.
Right. Because they can't do it 24
Yeah,
hours a day, right?
no. And I remember, you know, I was fatigued, which I was virtually every night coming home from work, because work situations were very stressful back then,
Sure.
just on their own. Anyway, you asked me, Dad, can you teach me how to read? And my heart just sunk. I'm like, oh my God, are you kidding me? This is like a 40-hour project, you know, every night for the next 3 months. Teaching you how to read. So somehow I got the energy to get a book. I consciously picked the easiest book, the one that you knew the most. And from a young age, I had read to the kids. And I had read enough that even when Hattie was 2 and 3, she would know all the words to the story. And so I would read up to the last, I would start off by reading up to the last word on the page. And then you guys would know what the word was, because it's always a rhyming thing, right? And then one of you would say the word, and I would turn the page. And then I got to where I would read down to the last sentence, and I would stop, and then one of you would say the last sentence, and I would turn the page. And it continued to the point where I was just turning pages, and you guys were saying all the words to these beginner books, right?
Yeah.
So I picked one of these books that I knew she knew.
Yeah.
And I said, Hattie, see this? this says, once upon a time. And she's like, oh. And so, and even when I was reading, I would point to the words. And so I think you had a little bit of a sense. But it was, I only spent maybe 5 or 10 minutes with you that first night. And we only did 3 or 4 words.
Yeah.
But I was able to say, once upon a time, and you knew the story. And so I would point to the word, and we did like 1 or 2 pages. And I said, now let's take this word, and it would be the.
Sure.
Because it's like 5 times on the page.
Right.
I said, you can see, and it's big print.
Yeah.
Okay? You can see, it's THE. You knew the letters by then.
Yeah.
I mean, you were 4 years old. The alphabet was.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, you could get it. And so anyway, we stopped, and you took the book away, and, things just went on. And a couple nights later, we did it again for another, and I was able to show you 3 or 4. And I was surprised that you were able to remember those other words. You were able to, the, and
right.
there were 1 or 2.
Like I had actually learned them as opposed to
Yes,
like,
you
that was
still
just
knew
gone.
them, yeah. So anyway, we added a few more words, and maybe we did it 1 more time, maybe 2 more times. So like 3 or 4 sessions. And then all of a sudden, you were coming back to me and saying, Dad, what's this word? And I would just say the word. And then you would go, oh, and then 5 or 10 minutes later, you would say, what's this word? And so within 2 or 3 weeks, you were reading on your own and just coming to me
For the ones that I didn't
for the
know.
few little words that you didn't know. Yeah, it was just remarkable. I could not believe it. And I was so thrilled because I thought
Here you were thinking it was going to be this great
that I was going to have to, thinking how I was taught to read by, teachers in grade 1, 2, and 3, and it took forever.
Well, and I think that just goes to show that the way a lot of students are taught to read is not the optimal way,
not optimal.
right? Like
No.
it sounds in this story, there was never a time where I'm sounding things out like p, p, u, p,
No.
never was that the case. I was just recognizing the word as a total unit.
Yeah, but
already from
eventually,
the get-go.
and then not too long later, the phonics kicked in.
Sure, and like for bigger words and whatever, but for a lot of these smaller words.
Right, at the very beginning, it was just you knew positionally, you knew the story, and so you could connect the word because they're separated by spaces.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you go back to books in the 16 and 1700s, they didn't have spaces.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know
Awful.
that?
Really?
Because
Yeah.
paper was so valuable.
Right, so they
So that
smushed it all together.
every ounce of space on the page.
Used,
Yeah, and so you can imagine how.
It's like hashtags. You really have to know what the words are, like, in order to parse them out into their.
So you can imagine presenting a page of text to a non-reader
Oh,
back
God,
then,
yeah.
and they're just like, well, that's magic.
Yeah.
It's witchcraft that you can
read this and
decode
understand.
that.
Scribbles, yeah.
So you were often reading at a very young age, and again, it was from the self-motivation. It wasn't me having to teach you how to read. What was lucky about it was that what you really were saying was, help me get started. You didn't use those words, but that's all you really wanted and needed. You didn't need me to sit down for an hour and teach you.
Yeah,
It was just, give me a quick little
Right. Give me the
key
little-
here and get me going, and I'll work at it myself. And you worked at it. You took the books away and you worked at it.
Yeah.
And you wanted to know what was,
Yeah.
what they were.
Yeah, I don't even remember a time in my life where I'm not able to read. Like, I don't have any memories of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Well, I've had a recent experience that's a little bit similar. So at New Iridium, we're dealing with a lot of patents. The patents start at the university, and then we license them when they're partway through what's known as the prosecution period.
Okay.
So from the time you file to the time the patent is granted is called the
Right,
prosecution.
and they're being processed by the
Yeah, and there's
patent
4 or
office
5
whatever,
stages of
yeah.
prosecution, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so it's become important for us. I mean, we're spending tons of money on legal fees and blah, blah, blah to have these things go through. So it's become
Well,
important for
patents
us to
themselves
know
are-
about them.
Are expensive too. Like, they're not free to apply for a patent.
Right, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. The legal fees to apply and to prosecute are ginormous.
Right.
Anyway, so over Christmas, Chern bought a bunch of books on patents. He gave me 3 and he kept 3 for himself, on chemical patents specifically. So anyway, I've been reading these books, and it's like, now that I know it, it's like, can hardly project myself back to when I didn't understand,
Yeah.
a little bit of the basic terminology, the basic
Right.
process, and the basic concepts. Right? It's just like impossible for me to think that I never
Knew that.
knew that.
Right,
It's sort of part of me now.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, and it's not even that difficult.
Right.
None of this stuff is that difficult. It's just,
Right.
a body of knowledge.
Yeah.
Just some arcane
Yeah. That's
and
so
arbitrary rules. Yeah, but it's a
Right.
similar, I had that similar feeling, and I remarked to myself your remark about not, knowing a time
Yeah.
before you read.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
of course it's different, but
Right,
it's
but it's
somewhat
also similar.
parallel.
Yeah. That's too funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you were a very physical child, not that the others weren't, but you were extremely physical, active, doing stuff. I remember the day
What is
we
it? 8-1?
came out to look at the house
Two-two?
at Governor's Ranch.
Mm-hmm.
We lived in Crestmore. We came out to look at the house, and so after a couple of hours, we took you kids to the park that was just down the street.
Right.
And you were like 5 years old, or maybe even 4. You weren't in gymnastics yet. You were a couple of years.
Yeah, I didn't start gymnastics till like 2nd or 3rd grade.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, you were just barely starting. You had started preschool.
Okay, so
So it was
probably
1991, the end of 19. Anyway, there was this swing thing, and it was wooden, and it had the legs.
They came to a point.
Yeah, it came to a point, and then another pair at the other end, and then
Yeah.
a bar across the top,
Sure.
and the swings
Were in
hung
between,
down.
yeah.
And first thing you did was you climbed up the wood to the top, and then you walked across
Oh, really?
from one end to the other. It's like 7 feet high, and you're 4 years old.
Yeah, no fear.
No fear whatsoever.
That's funny. I've never heard that story before.
Yeah. The first time I saw any fear in you was at a gymnastics meet. It was on the vault.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
I
I
think I
don't
know
know if-
exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, maybe you remember the same event.
I'm sure I do. Was it the one that Ed was there with you?
I can't.
Oh, you
Maybe
can't
it was. Maybe it wasn't. But in any case, you ran up to the vault and you stopped.
That's the exact one I'm thinking of.
Yeah. And I knew right then that was the end of your vaulting days.
Were you not just
The whole
not
point of
confident
vault
in
is
the
to
vault?
go over. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I had a lot of trouble. There's a thing called an arm circle when you're hurdling from your run onto the springboard.
Yeah.
So when you're running, it's 1 foot at a time. But
Right.
when you land on the springboard, you're supposed to land with 2 feet.
That's right.
And my coaches at the time were very technical. So I was very good. I could run and land with 2 feet, but my arms were not in the right place. So you need your arms to be up when you land. And I'm going from like running, and you're supposed to do this arm circle thing, and I would do like many on one arm, not on the other. Like it was a whole mess.
And you were
And
off.
so I would spend so much time, like if you just asked me to vault, I could run and vault, but usually my hands would be down low, and so it would result in like poor technical execution of the vault. And so they're really trying to get me to do this arm thing, and I could tell that as I'm running, like, oh, I didn't do it right. So it's like I don't even want to go over because I did it wrong,
Do it, yeah.
right? And so it was, it wasn't necessarily fear per se, but it is a little scary to be like diving headfirst at the vault without your arms in the right spot. So like that is scary, but I was also like it was just hard for me to get the top half of my body and the bottom half of my body doing what they're supposed to do at the same time. Like I could do the arm circle thing if I'm just standing there, right? And I could do the leg jumping thing if I don't have to worry about my arms, but doing the two together, something was just really tough. But I think I was like subconsciously afraid of it because you get a lot of speed going. Do you know what I mean? And I felt, when I'm tumbling, I get a lot of speed, but I also felt in control of that because it's all coming from me. The springboard like springs you way high, and like you're is not in control of that. So yeah, I remember that day specifically. That was not. That was the blue ribbons on everything, and then the rainbow ribbon on the vault. Like when you haven't even noticed, like you've never gotten that color before. So anyway,
Yeah. So in general, you were organized. Even as a young child, like you would crawl into the back seat and get in the the child seat and buckle up and do all those things. So I didn't have to lift you in and do all of that. You were very self-motivating and going to the next thing. In other words, there was no, you didn't get tired, and at the end of the day, just, there was never a point where we had to take over and do stuff for you. You just did.
Oh, that's fun.
All the way through, up right through to 12th grade. So yeah, you were a very easy child to parent.
Thank you.
There was never any issue with homework. You took, full responsibility for all of your own stuff.
Did you do it outside?
And
no.
So yeah, I never had to put any, energy into, making sure that your, assignments were done or homework or any of that stuff, or library books were getting returned or reports were getting signed. You were so proactive. You would have the papers out and say, Dad, this needs to be signed and this needs to be signed, right? And the boys would have lost the papers. I'm like, Robbie, don't you have one of these? Hattie brought hers out. You're in the same school. It's the same field trip tomorrow, or the same field day.
Right,
Where's
Where's your paper?
Where's the paperwork? Somehow he muddled through.
So what's it like I know Rob has Oli and Wells. So what's it like being a grandfather?
Oh, it's wonderful. And Sarah and Robbie do such a good job with the kids. They interact with them. They talk with them about different things. In the early days, they pointed stuff out, and that's sort of the beginnings of it, is just get them interested in their surroundings, and knowing that the parent is interested in the surroundings. Kids only want to do what they see, and a kid's sense of value. And you see this in Oli and Wells. If Oli's playing with a toy, then Wells wants to play with it. Why? Because her sense of value is based on Oli's sense of value.
Right.
If Oli wants it, then she wants it.
Right. If Oli's not playing with the toy, she's not interested in that.
Yeah. And there's a big thing about that with the parents too. If the kids see parents, on a cell phone, they want to use the cell phone. They impute a notion of value with whatever it is you're doing or what you're doing it with.
Right.
So if Robbie's out working on cars, Oli would want to be out there. If Robbie's in the garden or Sarah, then they want to be out there doing, and they are doing those same things. So they're getting a lot of good exposure. I think the Montessori program is outstanding. Just being exposed to some of the stuff that the kids have brought home, how they teach them to read in Montessori, I think is very powerful. Jeffrey got a good exposure to that this fall.
Yeah.
Some of the little tools and techniques that they use, which I think are just great.
Yeah. Well, what also really strikes me about the Montessori school is I feel like they really embrace the concept that kids are not too young to do things. Right? Wells would be 3 years old and they're having her set the table and she can carry the plates and she can put the knives and forks, right? I know so many parents, they'll be like, I'm not going to let my 3-year-old carry a fork, she's going to poke her eye out, or I'm not going to let her have a knife, right? Or she can't carry the plate, she'll drop it. And it's no, they can do these things.
Well,
there are going to be some mistakes along the way, but so I think the Montessori
So you're seeing
school,
that at home, that Wells can carry the plates at home.
But part of that is because, Sarah would tell me, well, that's her job these past 2 weeks. Her job at lunchtime.
Home. Oh, at school.
Lunchtime
I see.
At Montessori school.
At Montessori, yes.
And so the Montessori school is teaching them these skills, and then it translates when they come home.
Yeah, and I would go further on that to say that not only do they have them do these skills, but they make the kids take responsibility.
Right.
So even at younger ages, I would be there and go over to drop them off and pick them up. And one of the responsibilities at drop-off is they take off their boots and their jacket and they hang them up in their little cubby and their backpack.
Right.
And at the time I'm thinking, this is too much for Wells. In other words, she doesn't have the skills to do it. But they enforce it that it's the child's responsibility, and none of the teachers comes to their aid.
Right.
So and so the child learns that they have to do it.
Nobody's coming to save me.
And they can't run over to play
until
this is done. And so they enforce the discipline on the responsibility. And so I think the responsibility piece is as useful as the skill piece.
Right.
Yeah, so going further with your idea of the skill, and I was so impressed that they can have these kids at these young ages, bunches of them, and the first hour is all self-directed learning.
Mm-hmm.
And they get to choose what they want to do for an hour,
Right.
but they have to do it, and they have to do it by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just amazing to walk into a class of, I don't know, 10 or 12 kids and 1 or 2, adult
Right.
teachers, and it not be pandemonium. Any other situation I've ever seen.
Well, especially with kids that young.
Exactly,
right?
that's
Like,
what
they're
I'm
3 and
saying.
4,
Yeah, it's just, so yeah, I think Montessori has, tons of good attributes to it. And of course, the kids are getting lots of extra at home, and not to say that education is the only thing in life,
Sure.
but it really is an enabler. And of course, the kids, Ole and Wells, get all the other platform
Right.
things, the
get
love and
tons
the
of
support and
enrichment,
good food and lots of sleep and a stable home environment where the parents aren't arguing and violent and loud, and in other words it's
Or the parents have time to,
yeah,
to give some attention to
Right.
them too.
right, yeah. And so it's easy for me to interact with the kids. I've had enough exposure to them that they know who I am, and they can carry a conversation between saw them a few weeks ago and now, hence, in other words, there's a connection that's continuing. It's not just sort of these one-stop.
Sure, moments in time. that are separate,
So of course it's wonderful to see those, but I feel for Robbie and Sarah, knowing how busy they are, in their lives with kids that age, and there is no let up. It's
Right.
it's relentless,
24/7, yeah.
and it's 7 days a week, and it's 52 weeks a year, and it's so when they have opportunities to go to a party in New York and have a day off, it's a big thing. You will eventually realize, if I can babysit for a night or a weekend, you need to take advantage of those things. You need, just for your own. It's
Mental health.
It's absolutely like a get out of jail card. It's, we're free for the day.
Yeah, I mean, like when we went to do that last year, like Rob and Sarah paid for our whole flight.
Oh yeah.
Like they're like, please take our money, like let us have 24 hours.
Yeah.
So it was very generous of them, and we were more than happy. We had a great time.
I remember one day when you guys were at Governor's Ranch, so you're all little. Jeffrey was probably 3, maybe not quite 4. And so you were in like first grade, Robbie in second grade. And I came home and you were all there, and my thought was, oh my God, everybody is looked after. I think Jeffrey was napping, and you guys were doing activities. And I'm like, I have a half an hour to myself. It's like...
That hasn't happened since 1985.
Yeah, it's like, and of course that's an exaggeration, but you get the point.
Yeah.
It was like to get a single half hour in a 2-week period was like golden.
Yeah.
Because it just didn't happen otherwise.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so you get to a point where you're so busy, and busy beyond, there's this notion of threshold, right? If you get over your stress threshold level, the first thing is, notch back until you're back under the level. So, I kept decommitting on all kinds of things, right? Didn't even come close to that. And I didn't even understand the theory at the time, but it wasn't until many years later that I realized, I quit doing this, I gave up every other outside commitment I had. I had job and I had family, okay? And you are so far over the level, and I can take a lot of responsibility and a lot of stress, but I was...
It still adds up.
You're so far, it's kind of like my point about the Army, and you get an enemy, you cross the line, and you get an enemy territory, and you get far enough in, and you can't tell the difference between that and normal civilian life, right? In other words, you just can't tell. You're so far away from the...
Your normal is so stressed you don't even realize you're so stressed. Yeah.
Well, I realized it, but
I'm sure you felt it
there
in
was
your
just
body, but like...
I couldn't see back to that threshold. There was no way of getting back. There was no way to decommit further.
Enough,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Enough, right?
Kids gotta eat.
I would have had to, quit the 3 kids or quit the job.
But none
One of the
those
two.
really work.
And
Yeah.
even to some degree, the jobs by themselves were over the top.
Mhm.
And management has come a long way since then. And I'm sure there'll be stuff written about this over time. But your mother and I just happened to go through the system at a time where very little was known about stress to begin with, and companies, really abused us without knowing it. It's not like they were at fault; they didn't knowingly do these things, but these things happened, and now they do a much better job of managing stress levels in those types of jobs.
That's good.
Yeah, I'm sure they do, or nobody would work there, and nobody would accept the conditions that we worked under.
I see.
And we consider those conditions as normal. And today, people would consider those conditions as extreme to the point of unacceptable. And they would just go get another job somewhere else. And those same firms exist, and they've all grown. They're all 10x the size that they were back then.
Right, so clearly they're finding people that find it acceptable.
Yes,
so
exactly.
that
So they
means
must have
changed.
improved, because a worker's tolerance today for those behaviors, I mean, it would be prima facie unacceptable. On day one, they would say, you know what,
this is not
this
for
is
me.
not for me. Yeah, I'm not gonna do this. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, Dad, thank you so much for being on
Oh,
our
good.
podcast. We really enjoyed it.
Yes.
We're looking forward to having you guys here this week. And
Yeah, that's
that's-
going to be a fun week.
yeah, that's what we've been doing.
Deuces.